Hello and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files. It's been a little bit since I've made my last video, but really hasn't been a whole lot of stuff going on in the world of vinyl that warranted another video. But I think I've got something here that hopefully some of you will like. I'm sure the ones that have decided to click on this and watch it, it definitely isn't something that's appealing to you. But today I'm going to do a sound quality shootout with My Favorite Things by John Coltrane, and it's going to be the mono edition. And the reason for that, two reasons. One is the mono version is definitely by far the best version in my personal opinion. The stereo just has that hard pan left and right like you have, and I don't remember the specifics of what instruments are where, but you'll, as an example, have the drums and the piano, let's say, in the left channel, and the saxophone and the bass in the right channel, and there's nothing in between at all. So kind of defeats the purpose of having stereo, in my personal opinion. So I think that the mono version is definitely the best, and this seems to be a trait that most Atlantic jazz titles early on did, where they just did hard pan left and rights. They didn't necessarily have any kind of sound stage to speak of. So that's kind of my opinion on that, and that's the reason why I'm going for this. But the second and probably more important reason is Rhino just released a Rhino High Fidelity version of it. This is it. This is the My Favorite Things Rhino High Fidelity version. This is actually the French cover, and this does have a gatefold, and it has the original US cover on the inside as well. And the back cover, actually. If you look at the gatefold, the left-hand side is the front cover, the right-hand side is the liner, basically the back cover of the original US. And this was cut by Kevin Gray and pressed at Optimal, and it says it's from the original analog master tapes. So that's the biggest reason why I'm doing this as well. But the other reason being, other thing about this I should say, is that just a little bit of a background on this album for me, anyways, personally. This is probably, if it's not my favorite John Coltrane album, it's probably right up there near the top. And John Coltrane's one of my favorite jazz artists. So that's, it's got a personal thing for me here. I have a personal affection for this album. It's definitely one of my favorites of all times. I have several different variations, most of which are stereo, but I do have a total of 3 different mono versions of this. So one of the other version that I do have also, or I should say one of the other versions I also do have, is the 60th anniversary edition that was done, and this actually has the stereo. It's a 2-record set. It's got the stereo cut and the mono cut, and this was actually cut by Kevin Gray also, and it was pressed in Germany as well. I don't know if it was Optimal for sure, but I do know that it was pressed in Germany as well, because it gives credit to being made in Germany. So Kevin Gray cut, pressed in Germany. I do know that it's not the same cut though, because I looked at the dead wax at both this one and the Rhino High Fidelity, and the dead wax has a totally different information. There's no like cross outs or anything like that. So it's definitely a different cut. So something to be made sure of and said. I don't know if this particular one also has been cut from the analog master tapes. I would assume that it might be, but I don't know that for certain. So anyways, 60th anniversary edition that came out a few years back. And then the last mono version I have it's a very early pressing. I don't know if it's a first for sure. I have a hard time distinguishing first pressings from Atlantic, but anyways, it's a early mono pressing from Atlantic. It's in so-so shape. I would say VG to VG plus-ish. It's got a little bit of noise to it, but it's not terrible. It's actually in pretty good shape. So anyways, so that's the early pressing. So to kind of give you an idea of what I do when it comes to doing these sound quality shootouts, I try to get them so it's as least biased as possible from one recording to another. So what I do is I level match every single one. I have a meter on my phone that gives me the decibel meter and the average decibel rating of all these from playback, and I try to make sure that I get them all within about a half a dB, half a decibel of one another, technically speaking, if you're talking about from a scientific standpoint, some say that you can't hear differences below at 1 dB or lower, but I can sometimes hear a difference at around the dB level, so I try to keep it within about a half a dB of one another. And with this one, it was a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot of dynamic range in it, and the volume level shifts quite a bit during the whole song. So I had to let this play all the way through, or most of the way through to the first side anyways, to try to get an average decibel rating for each record. And what I ended up determining is they are probably within a 0.2 or 0.3 dB of one another. So they're all really close to the same volume level. There's very little difference. So I got them level matched, and it was going to be very easy because they are all pretty much at the same volume level. So that was the good news. So what are my thoughts? So first thing I will say is obviously played the new Rhino High Fidelity all the way through first, just because it's my new version that I've never listened to all the way through. I thought it sounded spectacular, as Kevin Gray stuff tends to sound. It had a good, solid bottom end. It was deeper, tight and deep. It had a good high end. Wasn't crazy over the top high end, and there's just some great clarity to it. Soundstage, obviously, there's really not much of a soundstage to speak of in a mono recording, so can't really judge that, unfortunately. But overall, I think it sounded very good. The pressing was super, super quiet. Definitely one of my quieter pressings that I have, so that was a super spectacular also. And overall, I thought it just was a great copy, as all the Rhino High Fidelities tend to be, and Kevin Gray, again, I think just did a spectacular job on this. So next, I actually went and compared this Kevin Gray, the Rhino High Fidelity, with the more recent reissue that had the stereo and mono cuts, which was done by Kevin Gray also. And I have to say, I had a very hard time hearing a difference at all. If there was a difference, it was super, super, super subtle. It was not very obvious, the differences that were there. I just really couldn't pick any out. They were probably within a 0.1 dB of each other, and that could even just be, there could be a little bit of an error just because of, I have an imperfect way of measuring the dB, so I did the best I could. So I would say if there was going to be a difference that I could pick out between the two, the Rhino High Fidelity does have a little bit less noise, at least in the dead wax. So it seems like it might be a slightly quieter pressing, but during the playback, or I should say during the actual music itself, you can't hear a difference between them when it comes to like the surface noise on the two. So both were pressed very well. The new one had a little bit better pressing, but marginal at best. So then I put on the early pressing, and it sounded really, really good, and it was actually a little bit better than I anticipated, because generally speaking, and my experience has been on early pressings, they tend to cut down a little bit on the treble, cut down a lot on the bass a lot of the times, and I found that this actually, it definitely had a little bit less treble and a little bit less bass than the Rhino and the 60th anniversary editions, but there wasn't a lot less there. But it was definitely, on the bass, you could definitely feel the bass more on the two Kevin Gray cuts versus the original. But there was still a good amount of bass on this one, and it had a decent amount of treble, definitely not as much. And I think that kind of gave the appearance or the perception of the two Kevin Grays maybe sounding a little bit clearer per se. There was definitely what appeared to be a little bit more distortion on the early pressing, but I think that might just be because of maybe the playback from the previous owner on this one. There's definitely some minor damage on this. As I mentioned, it's like a VG to VG plus, so the effects of that grade, or that those issues that I mentioned on it, I think take into effect when talking about the distortions that I was hearing. Overall, though, I would say there is not a ton of difference between them. And as I mentioned before, when you're doing a mono, or I should say comparing a mono, there's not really a sound stage to speak of really on a mono. It's super minor at best. And so, and that was definitely the case here. The early pressing was super spectacular, and I'd say if you have a early pressing that's in super spectacular condition, I think you're going to be very happy with it. I still think that these newer pressings are probably quieter pressings, even if you got one that was in near mint condition from back in the day, which is nearly impossible to do. And if you don't have one already and you want to get one, my guess is they're going to be a lot more than these Kevin Gray cuts. And the Kevin Gray cuts, I think, have, well, I shouldn't say I think. I know they've got a little bit more bass and a little bit more treble, but there's certainly, in my opinion, not over the top more. There's definitely noticeably more, but not a lot more. And I don't think it's going to be something that you'd be dissatisfied with if you're not a fan of extra bass or extra treble, because I think it gets that bass and treble level right in comparison to the original, even though it's minor at best. So I would say this, that overall, my final take here is, if you have an early pressing that's in really good condition, or you have this 60th anniversary edition version, there's going to be either little to no difference in the sound qualities. I would say, if you've got a beat up copy, or or you don't have the 60th anniversary edition, I think the Rhino High Fidelity is definitely a good choice, because it's going to be super quiet. It's going to have super good sound quality. I think Kevin Gray did a spectacular job, and I think you'd be very happy with it. So, if I had to venture a guess, if you don't already have a copy of this in your collection as a mono version, getting a copy in great condition, the earlier pressings of mono ones, I think it would be very expensive to try to find them in comparison to the high fidelity. So the high fidelity one's like, $39-40. So I really don't think you're going to find a early pressing for that price in great condition. So that's kind of my take. The Kevin Gray cuts, both are pretty similar. Little bit of an edge in comparison to the early pressing in terms of, if you want that little bit extra bass, a little bit extra treble, the Kevin Gray cuts are going to do that for you. So, and they're both quieter, at least quieter than my pressing that I have. So take that for what it's worth. So that is my take on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have these, any or all of these versions, or do you have a copy that you think is better than any of the versions that I did a demo of here, or did a sound quality shoot of here? I'd really love to hear your take. Is there like a Japanese pressing that's spectacular, or is there a specific early pressing that just is a lot better than any other mono early pressing out there? So I'd love to get your take on that. But anyway, that is everything I have for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button. If you subscribe, thank you very much for subscribing. If you don't, I'd love to see you subscribe. I'd love to see some new subscribers. And comment below if you have anything else to say or talk about on this. So that's everything I have for this week. I want you to have yourself a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thanks a lot.